Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
We're back with another great episode of the All Me podcast. This is Don Hooten Jr., and today I'll be your host. The world of public and media relations is a crazy one. It's a fast pace, and there's always something new to talk about. In this interview, I'm going to be speaking with Taylor Hooten Foundation's public relations expert and my friend, Rick Cerrone. In the sports and media industry, Rick has done it all. From the time he was in high school, he wanted to be in public relations, but he was very specific in the job he wanted. He told his guidance counselor that he wanted to be the director of media and public relations for the New York Yankees. In this interview, Rick is going to take us through his life's path to fulfilling his dream and the amazing people that he has met who has helped him along the way. For 11 of the most successful and tumultuous seasons in the New York Yankees history, Rick held what Sports Illustrated called the hottest seat in sports. As the team's senior director of media relations from 1996 through 2006, he worked side by side with some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment. Rick was the senior public relations counsel with the Yankees for an incredible run of 11 postseason appearances, 6 World Series, and 4 World Championships, as well as during the horror of 9/11 and numerous crises and controversies. There are so many inspirational messages that you can take away from this podcast. But for those who are interested in the field of public and media relations, there is no better expert to listen to than Rick Cerrone with Rick Cerrone Communications. We want to thank each of you for tuning into the All Me podcast and supporting the Taylor Hooten Foundation. Please take a moment and hit subscribe and be sure to leave us some feedback so that we can continue to reach more lives with our important message. Now let's get to talking to Rick Cerrone. Rick Cerrone, welcome to the All Me podcast, my friend.
Well, thank you, Donald. It's really an honor to be here.
This is going to be a lot of fun because you've had such a tremendous career and so many interesting stories, but throughout your career, you've seen and accomplished a lot. I'd really like for our listeners to know that your path to the top wasn't just handed to you, that you put in many hours of hard work, you sacrificed time with your family and never quit. But let's go back to younger Rick Cerrone and let's talk about where you grew up and what your interests were as a young man, and did you play sports?
Well, I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, the first 13 years of my life, and Mount Vernon borders on New York City. It actually borders the Bronx. My father was a firefighter, later became the chief of the department in Mount Vernon. But I was a kid who loved sports, specifically, or most importantly, baseball. And it was interesting, Donald, at a very young age, people say, well, how did you ever get to where you ended up? And I'm like, well, you know, when my buddies and I, or my dad would take me to the ball games, and then I'd go with my buddies, and every year we would buy the Yankee yearbook, which in 1964, the first year I bought one was 50 cents. But interestingly, I thumbed through the pages, and there's Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, Whitey Ford, Bobby Richardson, all the players. And then in the back of the book, there was a page that said, basically the team behind the team, and there was a big photo of the Yankees front office, which was all of about 24 people. And if you read their identifications, this person was accounting, this person was scouting, and there was one gentleman, his name was Bob Fischel, and he was the director of public relations. And then so when I would listen to the games, I would hear the announcer, Phil Rizzuto or Jerry Coleman or whoever it might be say, well, Bob Fischel just walked into the booth to tell us that home run by Joe Pepitone ties him for 12th on the Yankees all-time list. Well, that's a pretty good job.
Yeah.
So I really started identifying at some point that, yeah, that's what I'd like to do. So that's where it all started.
So you had a dream at a very young age of one day wanting to become the director of public relations for the New York Yankees.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, let's jump ahead to my real youth to, I want to say it was about 1970, which more than 50 years ago. And things happen in your life, and they happen in everyone's life. You can call them happenstance. They could be small miracles, whatever they may be. But when I went to Yorktown High School, for whatever the reason, I was a terrible student. We won't get into the reasons why. You don't pay attention, whatever. I had a terrible freshman year. My grades were awful. And then this happenstance happens where my guidance counselor, my freshman year, a very nice man, he was made principal for my sophomore year. So anybody that had this guidance counselor was divvied up to the other guidance counselors. Now, I don't know how my name, maybe they did it alphabetically, I don't know. Maybe they gave him the worst students, but I was given to a man named Bud Dowds. Now, that might seem like a trivial thing, but if my last name doesn't begin with C, and I'm given to somebody else, then we're not having this conversation right now. I feel very strongly about that. So Bud Dowds was also the football coach, and in fact, his father was the very first head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers back in the early 1930s. So, it meant a lot to me. I'm thinking, wow, that's great. I got the football coach. So the first meeting I had with him that sophomore year, probably just, again, acquainted meeting, and he is reading what I called my rap sheet, and you would refer to as your grades.
Yeah.
And he's looking at these, they were awful. And he asked me a question that literally changed my life. He asked me, what do you see yourself doing when you're a grown-up? I'm probably paraphrasing, but that was in essence the question. And I knew when he asked it that he was, whatever I said, I want to be an airline pilot, I want to be a fireman, whatever it might have been, his response was going to be, well, if you want to do that, you're likely going to need a high school diploma, and the way you're going, you're not going to get one. But when he asked the question, my answer was very quick. I said, Coach, that's easy. I'm the public relations director of the New York Yankees.
So you had big aspirations.
Well, I guess. And he was taken aback, and he will tell you to this day, 50 years later, that he said that was the most amazing thing that ever happened in my office. And this man counseled hundreds, if not thousands, of young people. And I remember him saying, well, that's very specific. Maybe you should think about, I want to be the public relations director for a professional, baseball team. And I'm like, I don't want to be the PR director of the Phillies or the Pirates. No, the Yankees. And I explained to him about Bob Fischel, who he was and what he did. He does the game notes, he does the media guide, the yearbook, whatnot. And he said to me, all right, I'll make you a deal. If you can get your grades up and keep them up, do you think you can do for my football team what Bob Fischel does for the Yankees? And my reply was, when do we start? And I became the PR director of the Yorktown High School football team and later the basketball team. And I will tell you, I took it very seriously. The 1971, 71, and 72 Yorktown High School football teams, of which I was the PR director, we had a media guide. Now, no high school football teams then, and maybe even now, had a media guide. I mean, Coach Dowds will tell you to this day, we never had one before, Rick, and we never had one after.
I don't ever remember reading a media guide when I was in high school.
Yeah. But, it was funny. There was a gentleman that used to come to the practices once in a while, because there was a radio station, WFAS, that did the high school game of the week. So maybe 2 times a year, 3 times a year, we would be the game on the game of the week. And I always thought, how does this poor announcer, Jerry Desmond, one, know how to pronounce the players' names? And number 2, how does he know anything about them? So I had bios in the media guide. Tim Klemchuk, quarterback. Here's his parents' name, where he was from, what he wants to be when he grows, whatever. And that, that led to the next step. I mean, that was the first happenstance, and then more happenstances or miracles would happen in my life even while I was at Yorktown High School.
Well, you couldn't have got better experience for what ultimately you ended up doing by taking on that role in high school. But I also want people to hear, especially our younger listeners, is just because you're struggling, whether it's in high school, middle school, or even college, never give up, especially if you have a dream just like yours, because ultimately you get your grades up. You're the PR director for your high school, and probably, like you said, one of the only ones in the country, even back then and even now. That leads you to attending Northern Illinois University. What led you to attending NIU?
Well, you got to go back to the time. At that time in high school, until my senior, I had never been on a plane. So Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois, might as well have been on the moon. That's not in my thought process when I was looking for what college out there will accept me. So another happenstance or miracle that happened in high school was that one of the gentlemen from the local newspapers that covered Yorktown High School sports was a man by the name of Stanley Shallett. And he took a liking to me, and he would sit with me at games. And after a while, he didn't even come to the games. He had me write the story and call it in, whatever. So my senior year, the first part of my senior year, I remember him calling me up and saying, look, I've got some bad news. I'm going to be leaving. I don't know if he phrased it as bad news, but I'm going to be leaving. I've accepted a job as the sports editor of the DeKalb, Illinois Daily Chronicle. Okay, well, Stan leaves and I continue on. And then one day he calls me from out there and he says, where do you stand on looking for colleges? And I said, well, I've applied to here and there. And they're all small colleges. Selinsgrove, Susquehanna, Westchester State, all in Pennsylvania. At Mr. Dowd's direction. And he said, well, you need to come out and look at this school that's in DeKalb, Northern Illinois University. It's a major university, 22,000 students. They have an up-and-coming sports program. You need to come out and look at this school and consider this, because they also have an award-winning daily newspaper, and you need to write every day. So none of the other schools offered that. So I flew out there to visit with Stan and his family, stayed with them. This is in January of 1972. Okay. And the week before I went out there, their basketball team beat the number 5 team in the nation, Indiana University, in Bobby Knight's first year by like 19 points. So I went out and stayed with Stan, and he's taking me to booster club luncheons. He's introducing me to the football coach, the basketball coach, and they're all like, almost like I was a recruit. They're kind of doing a sales job. We went into the basketball office, and the whole team is there. I remember they got new sneakers. I call them sneakers, athletic footwear, whatever it's called now. And they were all opening these boxes with their red sneakers, and I'm like, this is for me. So I got in there basically because of my extracurricular activities. In fact, recently I was going through a box of things that my late mother had saved, and she saved everything, every check that was written, and there was a letter of acceptance from NIU, and it said very clearly, you've been accepted based on your extracurricular activities and whatnot. So, happenstance or miracle that I'm assigned to Bud Dowds, happenstance or miracle that I meet Stan Shallett, that he gets the job in DeKalb, in a place where there's a university with a daily newspaper, a campus radio station. So when I was out there, I kind of settled in my first semester of 1972, and then I went over to the newspaper and got a job on the sports staff, and I was the low man on the totem pole. Yep. I mean, I'm covering tennis, which I know nothing about, and messing up the reporting of it. I'm covering, I'm not yet to basketball and football, but I got there kind of quickly. And then I also, my senior year, I decided, let me move over to the radio station. Mm-hmm. I became sports director of the radio station, and I did the football games and the basketball games on radio. Mm-hmm. So that really and all the while, I'm thinking that this is what you do if you want to be a Major League Baseball PR director, because in those days they were all journalists. They were all either former sports writers or people that had backgrounds in journalism, because academically there was nothing else for you. There were no sports management, sports media, all this, what my son would later take, many years later at Duquesne University. They didn't exist. So the way to that job was through journalism, and that's what I did.
And having the opportunity to know you and travel with you over the years, and I know you're great at broadcasting. I've listened to you and Greg Brown in the broadcasting booth there at Pirate City in Florida. Did you ever want to get into radio broadcasting and be a voice versus some of the journalism stuff that you were doing?
Let me jump ahead, or maybe jump back, because in my freshman year, I think it was my freshman year, because I remember where I was living. I sent a letter to Bob Fischel, and I asked. The letter was for a summer job. Now, you did not use the word internship in those days, because that was strictly a medical term. Okay. It was a summer job, and I remember getting the response. Later that month, he responded very quickly, and I still have the letter. In fact, I have it framed, saying that, there are no opportunities right now. I'll keep your resume on file, but quite frankly, I'm not optimistic. A major league front office is very small, blah, blah, blah. So, I guess I did think about other opportunities. In fact, it's funny how things lead you to different things. So when I left NIU and I came back home, now I'm back home in New York. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to start out at the Daily News, and I'm not going to start out at the New York Yankees.
Yeah.
So the only thing available to me at the time was I think it was a part-time job for a supplement to a local newspaper that came out like once a week. The Putnam Ledger, it was called, and I would write feature stories, and I'd have to find the stories and and do this. But something else then happened. Happenstance or miracle. There was a man that I met, because when I was the summer sports editor, I went back to NIU for the summer semesters for 3 straight years, my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And I was the sports editor and really the sports staff of the student newspaper, which I think came out 3 times a week during the summer.
Okay.
And I had to find a way to fill at least a page and a half, maybe 2 pages, every 3 times a week. And there was no sports going on. I'd go over and talk to the football coach, and I would get his thoughts. Well, that's one story, I know, but I would kind of try to find other stories, some of which I could write in advance, like feature stories. And there was a gentleman that lived in my hometown, and I found out that he was making baseball cards in his basement and selling them. And, they were like the 1927 Yankees. And it would be a card of every guy from that team, the 1941 Dodgers. And I found that interesting, and I did a story on him. And my senior year, he started sending me this magazine that he had created called Collectors Quarterly. Mm-hmm. And they had baseball cards in the centerfold. The centerfold of each magazine was, baseball cards that you cut out. And when I got home, he called me up and he said, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to finish off the last issue of Collectors Quarterly. It's the 4th one of the year. And then when you're done with this, I'm out. I don't want to do it anymore. The reason he needed me, that his editor went off to college. So his editor was a high school senior. His name happened to be Keith Olbermann, who would become very famous as a sportscaster for ESPN and other networks, and is still a dear friend. But so I took this magazine. He gave me this box with all this manuscripts and wax, and I had to lay out everything, because you didn't do it on your computer. There were no computers.
Yeah, there were no computers.
You had to correct the articles that the writer would mail into you and send it to the typesetter, cut it up, lay it out, and I did it, and I loved it. And I said, I've got to find a way to keep this going. So I basically talked him into keeping the magazine going, but changing it from a collector's magazine, which had a somewhat limited audience, and there were, as I told him, there's already a number of collectors' publications. You're just crowding the market. But there are no full-size baseball magazines other than the annuals. You know, there was Baseball Digest, which came out every month, but that was, pulp, newsprint, and it was a digest size. So he agreed to it. So he and I basically, his name was Mike Arenstein, a genius in sports marketing. He and I basically learned the magazine business from the ground up because neither of us had any idea of really what we were doing. The first magazine we did, he sold subscription only because he had a flyer that went to like 20,000 people. So maybe we got 800 responses and we printed up 1,000 copies at a local printer.
So did you keep the name of that magazine, or did you guys rename it?
Well, no, we changed Collectors Quarterly, morphed into Baseball Quarterly.
Okay.
And after we put out, and it was on glossy stock, although it only had a one-color cover. But somebody saw the magazine. I don't remember who it was, where it was, but this person said, "This is really nice. Is it on the newsstand?" I'm like, "The newsstand? It's not really a real magazine." And he said, "Well, it should be."
Yeah,
and we're like,
it.
I'm like, "Well," so I said to Mike, I said, "How do we do that?" And he said, "Well, my uncle Selig is in the newspaper, the magazine business. He's a wholesaler, which means that's where the magazines go, and then they're distributed from the wholesaler to the individual newsstands." So we went out and visited with Mike Arenstein's uncle Selig, with the cigar in his mouth and the apron on, and he's basically saying, "Well, this is really nice. You'll need a national distributor." So he set up a meeting with me with these two gentlemen from this national distributor called Cable News. And this is how long ago it was, 1976 maybe. They took me to lunch, and I wasn't wearing a jacket. And the waiter comes over and hands me a jacket to put on while we're having lunch. I'm like, wow, great first impression.
Real good.
So they liked it a lot. They said, let's do a test for the rest of the year. You got 3 issues left this year. Give me 10,000 copies. 10,000 copies?
Whoa.
Are you kidding me? We can't afford to print 1,000 copies. So he said, you also need a color cover, get rid of the baseball cards, the whole, and he hooked us up with a printer. He goes, yeah, you're printing it locally. Come on, you're probably paying $1.50 an issue, which is exactly what we were paying. He said, no. There's a printer with offices in our building. We'll give you. So they set me up with this printer that was in their building, whose plants were in Mississippi.
Okay.
And we gave them the magazine, told them the specs we wanted, and they came back and said, okay, 10,000. That'll be 28 cents a piece.
You're like,
oh
wow.
We're paying less money for this than we were for the 1,000 copies. So now the bottom line, Donald, is through that happenstance of Mike Arenstein asking me, finish off this magazine and then I'm out, I morphed that into I am now the youngest editor and publisher of a nationally distributed magazine in the country. So there you are.
What a way to get experience, and also your business doings and building relationships, and probably going forward. Now I understand why you always dress nicely every time we go to dinner, just in case, since you forgot your jacket way back then. That's a good story, though.
Oh, and I'm wearing this khaki jacket. I think it was a waiter's jacket. So, I mean, but those days have long gone by. But, I did that for 5 years, and then there was the baseball strike of 1991.
Yep.
But that really kind of put the nail in our coffin because we couldn't grow anymore without advertising, and it was tough to get advertising. The big magazines that get these, national companies, a lot of them give away their magazine. When you go Publishers Clearinghouse, you're getting 10% of your subscription. You're reducing your subscription price, and then you're only getting 10% of that. And the idea is that, well, you can renew them at full price.
Yeah.
So I decided it was time to close the door in 1981 when baseball went on strike. But I had built up a reputation in the game. I now knew everybody.
Yeah.
I'm working with Bob Fischel, who's now the head of PR for the American League. I'm working with PR in the National League. I created awards that, we had a player of the year, but what made ours different was that it was voted upon by the managers.
Mm-hmm.
So the players, wow, okay, that's pretty good. And then we also gave each winner of the player of the year each year, we did get an advertiser, Panasonic. They made, TVs, radios, VCRs. And we, through Panasonic, were able to give each winner a VCR, a video player. And at that time, it retailed for $1,500.
For a VCR?
So players, for a VCR when it first came out. So players were more than happy to come at our expense to New York, and I split the cost of bringing them in with the baseball writers' dinner because they were bringing them in. So I said, look, I'll pay for their flight, you pay for their room, or vice versa, what we did. And these players, the first year, Ron Guidry and Dave Parker, then Keith Hernandez and Don Baylor. And then we had our player of the decade after the 70s were over, and here's Pete Rose. So people in baseball, the commissioner knew me, Bowie Kuhn. So when I left, within about a year, a job opened up in the commissioner's office in the PR department, and I applied for it. And I remember the head of PR interviewing me and saying, Rick, this is kind of a step back for you. I said, well, sometimes you have to take a step back to take two steps forward. I made up my own quote. And I got that job, and it was wonderful. I learned a lot. I was there, and it gave me structure because now I'm working on Park Avenue.
Yeah.
And you have to dress and act a certain way, whatever. I'm not working in my little, my basement or the little office I had in Peekskill, New York for Baseball Quarterly. So it was a great experience. And, it was just one of those other things that just took me a step closer. And, I remember saying to somebody that interviewed me for the local paper when I started the magazine, I remember saying to him, look, at the very least, at minimum, it's a very expensive resume. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, that's what it was, but I learned a lot. I learned how to put on a press conference. I learned how to be a magazine editor, which later on would come in very handy.
Exactly. So now you're working for Major League Baseball Commissioner's Office. What type of work are you doing for them?
Well, when I started, I was the low man on the totem pole, and I would cut out box scores. And in those days, you cut out the box scores, you put them on paper, and you cut out newspapers, and you distributed the news clippings to everybody in the office. So you couldn't get any lower than that. But there were some things I was able to do. In my first full year with the commissioner's office was the 50th anniversary of the All-Star game, and they had an old-timers All-Star game the day before, and I got to write all the intros of the players for the Master of Ceremonies, who was the legendary Jack Brickhouse, the longtime voice of the Chicago Cubs. So, there was a lot of fun things to do, and then I got more involved in, the media aspect of the World Series and the special events. So, again, it was a tremendous learning experience. But I will tell you, being there for 5 years as the assistant director, and at the time I'm really thinking every time there's a new commissioner, he's going to bring his own top guy. So I'm never going to get promoted. Mm-hmm. That's just the way I was thinking. So during the 1986 Mets-Red Sox World Series, which what a thrill to be a part of that, a young woman approached me who I knew. She was a promotions director for a local New York City AM and FM radio station that was around forever. The FM side was classic rock, so they were okay. But the AM side was like the music of your life. And their audience was literally dying off and was not being replaced by younger listeners.
Yeah.
So she said something to me at this lunch. In fact, when she set up the lunch, she said, "I want to take you to lunch, and all I'm going to say is that it's going to change your life."
That's
like,
good.
What,
that could be really interesting.
Yeah, that could be really interesting. So I had lunch with her, and Donald, I'll never forget the words she said because they were very prophetic. She said, "Rick, we at WNEW believe that the future of AM radio is sports." Mm-hmm. Now, this is a time when there's not any 24-hour-a-day sports stations. There's no all sports stations. You know, some stations, two stations in New York at the time, WNBC and WABC, each had, with very established hosts, a single host, a 3-hour-a-night sports talk show. Mm-hmm. I think that's what it was called, Sports Talk or Talking Sports or whatever, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. They both went against each other. Well, she suggested that she wanted a third show to be on NEWAM because it was going to anchor their sports programming, because they were going to buy up every sports property they could. They already had the New York Giants. They got the syndicated packages for Penn State football, Seton Hall basketball. So they were going to be an all sports station without really being an all sports station.
Which, if you think about it right now, I mean, that's hard to wrap your mind around, considering you can pick up your cell phone right now, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sports, whatever sport you want, men's sports, women's sports, you name it. So that's just hard to think about.
Right. Well, 34 years ago, which is when this was, 1986, 87, that wasn't the case. So they said, we're going to give you 3 hours a night, a blank slate that you fill however you want to fill it. But, so the one thing they said is the only thing we have to tell you is we already have a host. Someone that was on the FM side, they wanted to move over to host this show. They had already given it to him. So I would be the executive producer.
Okay.
So we started the show. I remember this gentleman, Richard Neer, who's still on the radio in New York, and we mapped out on a napkin the show. We cut this circle into thirds. Every 20 minutes, we were going to have sports updates with the scores and news and whatever, and we were going to have all these unique things that nobody else at the time had. We were going to have a Knicks reporter, a Yankee reporter, and we hired like writers that were there to call in every night, whatever, with a 5-minute Yankee report. No one was doing that. So we did it, and then we went to the Super Bowl. The Giants were in the Super Bowl, so they wanted to send the show to do shows there that week. But Richard, for some reason, couldn't go. So they sent me to anchor it from there, and Richard was back in the studio. And the station manager liked the dynamic of us together, that when I got back, he said, I want you on the show as a co-host. I can't pay any more money, but that's like, I'll be on the radio. That's great.
That's cool.
But so the other thing I got him to do was, and like, you don't know what you're asking me. I said, you can't start this show at 6:00. You got to get a leg up on the competition. You got to start at 5:00 when people start getting in their cars.
Yep.
At 5:00, I'm paying the 2 to 6 DJ, who was a legendary guy in New York, Julius LaRosa. Older people will know that name, but I'm paying him for 4 hours. Now you're telling me he's going to do 3 hours, but he agreed with it, and we started at 5:00. But a funny thing happened. Happenstance again. I don't know. I wasn't satisfied with this. I wasn't enjoying it. It's not what I wanted to do. Yeah. I missed baseball, and I missed that I never got the opportunity to be a team PR director. Now, I will tell you, Donald, let's go back to that letter from Bob Fischel. Mm-hmm. He writes the letter, I think it's dated December 27th, 1972. And I only realized this recently, right? When he wrote that letter, like 5, 6, maybe 7 days later, and he had no idea this was coming, his life was going to change dramatically. The Yankee franchise would change, and my opportunity to be the PR director would change, because on January 3rd of 1973, just a week after Bob Fischel, who was there for 20 years, wrote me that letter. The Yankees were sold by CBS to a relatively unknown shipbuilder from Cleveland by the name of George Steinbrenner.
Okay.
And in the next 25 years, 24 years, whatever it might have been, between that letter from Bob Fischel and my ultimately getting the Yankee job, he had gone through a dozen PR guys. Mm-hmm. I mean, the longest serving PR man under George Steinbrenner had been a man named Harvey Green, who was there for like 3 years. And they called him the Lou Gehrig of Yankee PR directors. So when things change, and I'm no longer thinking, when I'm doing that radio show, of the Yankees as being an opportunity, because as George Costanza said on Seinfeld about George Steinbrenner, he fires people like it's a bodily function. So It's not as attractive as it once was, but I did not enjoy the radio. So what happened? A young woman by the name of Nancy Rich, who was an executive trainee in the commissioner's office while I was there, when she left to get her job, the job she landed was as the Centennial Coordinator for the Pittsburgh Pirates, because 1987 was the Pirates' centennial season.
Okay.
One day in 1987, I think it was in June or July, I'm doing the show now for 5 or 6 months, she called me up, Cerrone, the Pirates just fired their VP of PR, and they're looking for someone. Your name has come up, so if you're interested, you should call so-and-so.
And let me hit pause there real quick, because one of the themes that you're continuing to say over and over is just from the time you worked with the local paper to the baseball magazine to the commissioner's office to the radio show, you were building relationships. And I want to point out to everybody listening, having traveled with you for multiple years, you're great at relationships. You're great with people. There's strangers that we will walk up to that you've known for years. You're one of the most popular guys in baseball that I know. But it's interesting when we always start a conversation, and I've told hundreds of people this, you never get within 2 or 3 sentences before you make sure, hey, let me introduce you, to both parties. And you're just a great relationship person. That's something I wanted to tie together as you move through these career positions. One of the things that you haven't mentioned is just the great relationships that you've built along the way.
Well, thank you. And I think that's very important. And I do teach a college course now at Iona College in New Rochelle, New York, and I try to impart this on young students who I think are not really, it's not really, they don't learn that. They don't understand. We live in a world today where people believe that communication is digital, emails, texts. You can't rely on that. Yes, because when you need somebody, the time when you need to call somebody for a job, they're not going to think, oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, he texts me all the time, whatever. But I learned a lot of great lessons, and I made a lot of mistakes. Nobody's perfect. No. But one thing that I always believed was in relationships. I learned, and you should, and I would tell this to people, and I tell this to my students, learn from everybody you can.
Exactly.
Learn when you read about things. When I read books about people, whatever, there's always like one thing that sticks with me.
Yep.
It might be one line. It might be, but I remember when Wellington Mara, the longtime owner of the New York Giants, passed away, and I was reading all of the tributes to him and all the stories written about him, one of the people they interviewed was like the security guy at Giant Stadium, who said, he always stopped and said hello. He knew my name. He asked how, this and that. And he says, it sounds like a small thing, but other people didn't do that.
Yeah.
And wherever I was, when I was with the Yankees, the Pirates, the commissioner's office, I would see people walk to their offices and never turn their head, just because they just couldn't be bothered with the people sitting at the cubicles.
Exactly.
so to speak. And I never believed it. I believe everybody's important. And, that person that you may have dismissed may end up being the CEO. I've run into that a number of times. Where somebody that may not seem significant to you, now they're, I wish, you can't go back to that. I wish I was nicer to that person. But I always believed in relationships. And getting back to some of the things that we've touched on so far, high school, college, Stan Shallett, Bud Dowds, the radio, you have to seize opportunity. You can't, I look back and I said, what if I said no to any of those? If I had said no to any one of those things, if I had said to Bud Dowds, I really don't want to, that's not what I want to be doing right now. If I had said no to Stan Shallett and stayed closer to home, if I had just done what Mike Aronstein, paid me $150, which was a lot of money back then, to finish up and let him go out of business. If I hadn't, I'm not going to, Rose, thank you so much, but I'm not going to go into radio. I'm going to stay at the commissioner's office. If I didn't go to Pittsburgh, this was my journey. I was supposed to be in Pittsburgh. And, there's people that I know. Well, Greg Brown, I mean, we have never talked about, but Greg Brown would be who's the voice of the Pirates on radio and TV. He'd be the first one to tell you that I made a difference. I'll tell you a funny thing about Pittsburgh. So I go to Pittsburgh and I'm in this interview process, and I had never been in an intense interview process like this before.
It's for a big role too.
Well, yeah, Vice President of Public Relations. You oversee community relations, media relations, in-game entertainment. But here's the kicker, Donald. So I get the job, right? And I go down there to accept it, and I'm at a game, and I'm in the owner's box. And a gentleman comes over to me, and at the time, the Pirates had, a year before, like 13 local companies, U.S. Steel, Westinghouse, Alcoa, they all combined to purchase the Pirates from the Galbraith family, who had owned them for many years. And the gentleman that brokered the deal, that put the group together, was a Pittsburgh icon. He was an attorney, and his name was Carl Barger. So at this time, Carl Barger, who would later become the president of the Pirates, he's the lawyer that brokered the deal. But he's in the owner's box. He's got a scotch in one hand, a cigarette in the other, different time. And he introduces himself and he says, "Do you want to know why we hired you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "We didn't hire you for your damn press notes or your media guide." I'm like, wow, that's kind of my forte. He said, "We hired you to say," and his vein is busting. He's so emotional. That's how much he loved Pittsburgh and he loved the Pirates. He said, "We hired you to convince this city that this great franchise will be here for another 100 years." Because there was a lot of rumors about them moving to Denver and they weren't doing well at the time. And I was like, wow, that's it? That's all you got? Okay. So anyway, I took that to heart. Okay, how do I convince this market that we're going to be here for another 100 years? The first thing I said to our head of business, Bernie Mullen, I told him what Carl Barger had told me, and Bernie said, "That's exactly right. That's what we're all here for." Everybody was kind of new there. And I said, well, why don't we try to get the All-Star game? I mean, we haven't had the All-Star game since 1974, which, looking back, was only like 15 years before. I said, why don't we try to get the All-Star game? And he said, well, how do we do that? I said, well, because I was on the commissioner's office side of giving out All-Star bids. Well, you have to make a bid. You have to say you have this many hotel rooms, you'll do this, blah, blah, blah. He says, well, go ahead. You're the coordinator of the effort to get the All-Star game.
Wow.
So I began. So we actually got the All-Star game. They offered it to us for 1992, which was great because the further away we get it, the better, because it gives us more time to convince them. We're not going anywhere if we got the All-Star game 4 years from now. But we couldn't accept the offer because every hotel in the hotel room in the city was booked by like the International Barbershop Quartet convention.
You've got to be kidding me.
Oh, I'm serious. So we got bumped to 94.
Okay.
So the other thing that I did was I said, yeah, these are funny things that happened. There was a kid, young man, his name was Joe Vogel, and he would stand in front of the door and then the press gate later in the day, and every time I'd walk by, he would ask, would you sign my petition to get the statue built for Roberto Clemente? He would ask anybody. That's all. Would you sign my petition? And I signed the petition, whatever. And one day I said, why don't we try to build the Clemente statue? Because that would show the market, number one, it's how is there not one already? But number two, it goes in line with telling the market we're not going anywhere. We're building a statue. We're not going to pack that away and truck it to Denver. It doesn't mean anything there. So, well, you know what I'm saying. So anyway, my assistant, Sally O'Leary, who was there since 1963, said, oh, go look at the files. There's Clemente file after Clemente statue file after Clemente statue file. They tried to do it in 74 and 76 and 78 and 81, and it was never successful. So now Carl Barger's the president, and I went to him, and he said, how are you going to do this? And I said, well, the Steelers just erected a statue for Art Rooney, their former owner. Mm-hmm. I said, why don't I meet with the Steelers and get their thoughts? And after meeting with the Steelers, I came up with a whole game plan. And at that All-Star game in 1994, the Clemente statue was unveiled and is still there, obviously to this day. So
is that
I'm very proud of that.
Is that the Clemente statue that's in center field or just outside the gates in center field at PNC Park? Yeah,
pretty much right. Yeah, behind right field. Yeah.
Yes, right field.
Yeah, right on the street. Yeah, it's in a wonderful location, and they've done a wonderful job with it. But I'll tell you another thing, Donald, that I think is very important. Things don't always go the way you want, because I never would have left Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I loved that job, but things happened. The Pirate ownership at the time kind of got in over their head to be competitive. We had wonderful teams. We won the NL East 3 straight years in 90, 91, 92. But it's like, I liken it to living off your credit cards. At someday they're going to knock on the door and say, hey, you owe us a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I remember somebody writing that the Pirate payroll had ballooned. Consider this. The Pirates' payroll for players had ballooned to $38 million. And the Pirate revenues were, gross revenues were only $45 million. Now, that's just not good. So anyway, they hired a new president, and one of the first things he did was lop off some of the vice presidents. And he also, to make matters worse, decided, I want this to be big news, and put out a press release and wanted this on the front page. I go, this is how bad things are. God. So I was no longer with the Pirates when that statue with great fanfare was unveiled. I was no longer there when that All-Star game, of which I was the coordinator and helped get, I wasn't there anymore in 1994. And I'll be honest with you, that hurt a lot. But what you have to do is you just got to get back up. The saying from, Rocky Balboa, not how hard you hit, it's how hard you get hit and get back up. Exactly. And you have to do that. And to anybody listening that's young or it's, it's no one's going to give you anything.
Yes, never.
And I don't think you would want that. But you've got to forge. And maybe listen. This is the life I was supposed to live. Did I get everything I want? No. Did I stay at the Pirates as long as I would have liked? No. Did I stay at the Yankees as long as I would have wanted? No. But what are you going to do? Are you going to just sit there and feel sorry for yourself? Or are you going to say, I'll give you a perfect analogy, It's a World War II analogy. When we thought we had the war won in like December of 1945, we thought we had defeated the enemy. We're just kind of finishing them off before we got to Berlin. Mm-hmm. And the Nazis had this unbelievable counterattack, which is now known as the Battle of the Bulge. Mm-hmm. And you know what Dwight D. Eisenhower's response was when they told him about this attack? He said, "What a great opportunity. What a great opportunity."
Interesting.
And by winning that, it ended the war. It basically ended the war. So I didn't think this at the time, leaving the Pirates, leaving the Yankees, whatever. But we haven't talked about the Yankees yet, and I'm sure you want to. But you're jumping ahead to 2006 when my contract is not renewed. I don't think I said what a great opportunity. But when I look back at the last 14 years, which includes my work with the Hooten Foundation and many other things, what a great opportunity.
Yeah. And so you leave the Pirates, it sounds like everybody basically loses their job. So now,
no, not everybody,
but a lot of the folks at the top, right? And you see that a lot in professional sports,
right?
But people lose their jobs. So you're standing there now. You're like, what the heck do I do next? How do you go from being with the Pirates to ultimately fulfilling your dream that you had as a young man back in high school of being the PR director with the New York Yankees?
Well, it's funny. When I left the Pirates, we so desperately wanted to stay in Pittsburgh because we loved it so much. We loved the community so much. And we've tried to find a way to stay there. So one of the things I did with the Pirates is I created an event called Pirate Fest. At the time that Pirate Fest was created, there was only one other kind of similar event. That's another thing we did, as part of this, outreach to the community. Bernie Mullen, the head of business operations, came to me with a program from this, like a printed program from this thing called the Die Hard Cub Fan Convention. And he said, "Can we do something like this?" And I looked at it and I'm like, well, we don't want to market ourselves to diehard fans. We got those. So the Die Hard Cub Fan Convention was very baseball oriented. A no-hitter forum, a wives forum. It was there wasn't, there wasn't a lot of fun and games involved, So my concept was to create something called Pirate Fest and create like an indoor amusement park that was themed around the Pirates.
Okay.
And it was fabulous. We had big autograph stations. We built a miniature Forbes Field with the beloved old ballpark, and we had our trivia contest there. We had things there. Every game had a pirate theme.
Heaven for a Pirates fan.
Yeah, it was like, and we had a museum. It was really great, and they do it to this day. And then every team started coming in, and then there was Cardinal Fest and Tribe Fest and Yankee Fest and All-Star Fan Fest. Yeah. So I would say that was a pretty good idea. But I remember one time saying to somebody, in the recap meeting, right? Well, okay, what do you think we can do to attract more fans, right? And somebody kind of snarkily said, "Get the Steelers involved," I'm like, well, we're not going to do that. But then when I left the Pirates, I said, what if you could do an event that had every Pittsburgh team? I had the Pirates, the Steelers, the Penguin, the University of Pittsburgh, and this and that. So I created an event company called Main Event Productions. And the first event we were going to do was the Three Rivers, the City of Champions Fanfare at Three Rivers Stadium, right? And I got all the teams involved, the Pirates, the Steelers. We had autograph sessions with all these great Steelers and Pirates from the past and present. It was terrific. But it didn't go as well as I thought it would go financially. And I had intended to do another event, like 2 a year, and there would be a completely different event, like a pop culture event. Mm-hmm. Bringing back the cast of Gilligan's Island, the cast of Leave It to Beaver, and all this. But I'm like, when it ended, I'm like, this is like the Rose Bowl. You got to start working on this now for next year. Well, I got a call from somebody at the National Hockey League that they were looking for a director or vice president of public relations for the National Hockey League. And somebody came to Pittsburgh and interviewed me. Then they brought me to New York and basically told me that I had the job. Here's your office, whatever, but I just have a few details to iron out. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem became that I don't think Gary Bettman, a lot of people had gone from baseball into the National Hockey League. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to just bring another, so it kept dragging out till, while they interviewed candidates, whatever. And then finally, Christmas Eve of 1995, the public relations director of the New York Yankees, turns out my predecessor, is fired. Christmas Eve of 1995, the back page of the New York Daily News is a big Bill Gallo caricature, because Bill Gallo was a famous cartoonist, and he had this character of Steinbrenner, von Steinbrenner, and he had him on the back cover, and it was like Scrooge with an exclamation point. At least that's my recollection of it.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law came down to Pittsburgh for a big baseball fan, big Mets fan. And he walked into my house, and he plopped the Daily News on my kitchen table, and he said, "Well, your job's available again." And I looked at it, and I'm like, I'm not calling them about this job because I know how this plays out. This young man, who I knew, he's going to get his job back. George is going to come to his senses. He's not going to fire this guy on Christmas Eve. And now I'm starting to get calls from people in New York, like sports writers, my friends for years, Bill Madden, Jack O'Connell. They're calling me up and says, your job is available. And I told them the same thing. Rob, the young man's name was Rob Butcher, now the PR director of the Reds. I said, he's going to get his job back. This is not, so I'm not going anywhere near this. So maybe a week after Christmas, after New Year, all these people call me back to a man. Rob was offered his job back. He opted not to take it. They're looking for someone. They want a more senior person, and your name keeps coming up. So if you want that job, this might be your last chance. I'm now 42 years old, right? Mm-hmm. He said the person to call is Arthur Richmond. Okay. Now, Arthur Richmond, legendary guy in baseball, but he was hired by Mr. Steinbrenner as a, quote, senior advisor. And I guess he was in charge of the candidate, just as he was for the candidates for manager. They remember the previous November, just a month or two before, they had hired Joe Torre to much controversy. And Arthur was the guy that went to Mr. Steinbrenner with a list of names, one of which was Joe. So I talked it over with my wife, and she said, well, there's really nothing for us in Pittsburgh. It would be nice to get, So I called Arthur, who I knew for years from the magazine. Mm-hmm. I knew him as far back as Baseball Magazine, so probably 15 years, if not 20. And Arthur, it's Rick Cerrone. Ricky, how you doing, my baby? How are you? I said, and I went on this whole soliloquy about the job and how I'm the right person and I wanted this job. And I'll never forget his words to me when I was finished. He simply said, "Are you out of your mind?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "This man is crazy. You can't work for him. He'll blah, blah." And so what I said was, "Well, Arthur, you work for him." Mm-hmm. He says, "That's different. I go right back at him." And I said, "Arthur, you'll help me. You'll be my guide. You'll be my mentor." "All right, well, I'll call you back." So he called me back. He asked if I can come up for an interview. The interview was on a Friday. It was the weekend of the photographer's dinner on Saturday, the annual black tie baseball writers dinner on Sunday. I interviewed on a Friday with their CEO, and I was staying with my mom and dad. I just drove up, stayed at mom and dad's, and I got back to my mom and dad, and she's, "What do you think?" I went, "It went well, blah blah blah," and she said, "Well, when do you think you'll hear?" I said, "I have no idea." As she said that, the phone rang, and the gentleman, David Sussman, who was the CEO, said, "Can you get a tux and be at the baseball writers' dinner on Sunday night? We'd like to have our PR man at the baseball writers' dinner." So I thought that was kind of funny because one time when I did apply for the job, and it was around the time of the baseball writers' dinner, I want to say 1982, 83, when Harvey Green, the longest-serving PR director under Mr. Steinbrenner, got the job. I was at the baseball writers waiting to hear. I still had not heard. And at the writers' dinner, they always say, sitting at table 26 is the great shortstop from the Mets, Bud Harrelson, sitting at table. And at one point, I'm kind of half listening, and sitting at table 26 is the Yankees' new director of public relations, Harvey Green. That's how I learned that year that I didn't get the job. So you jump ahead, 12 years, 14 years, and that's how I was introduced as the director of public relations of the New York Yankees. And I will tell you that when I started work that Monday, I get to my office. The first phone call I made was to Yorktown High School and Buddy Downs.
Okay.
And I go, "Rick, it's so good to hear from you. How are you?" I said, "Coach," I said, "remember when you would tell me that I have to think about things other than the New York Yankees?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, now I don't, because I'm sitting at the chair of my new office and I'm looking out at the playing field at Yankee Stadium." I think he dropped the phone. So
he had to have had chills all over his body.
Yeah, that was a great moment because, if that meeting in his office doesn't happen, then I don't get that job.
Yeah. So, and I want to get back to Steinbrenner, who people call the boss, because I know you have amazing stories about working, for George Steinbrenner, the Steinbrenner family, and people as we travel to the spring training parks and other big league parks. There's always great stories. What's it like working for George? Because one of the things that you had mentioned was you had told Art, how do you work for him? Are you crazy?
Right.
And he said, he's a tough guy. And I know you're a really tough guy and you'll stand your ground and, you push back and that's what you do. What's it like working for George? And I mean, from the takeaway from the boss, what do you learn from a guy like him?
Well, I'm going to go back to 1977 when the Yankees won the World Series, their first World Championship since 1962, and I had the magazine, Baseball Quarterly. And I somehow got Mr. Steinbrenner to sit down with me in his office for what we call the baseball interview or something like that. It was just a basic Q&A. And he agreed to be the subject. So it's November of 77. I'm in his office. Which is a big thrill. It was a thrill for me to park my car in the employees' parking lot. And remember, at the time, this is the job that I ultimately want. Mm-hmm. And I did this interview, and Donald, I remember asking him a question about his managerial style. I said, "Do you manage different people different ways? Do you manage Billy Martin different than you manage somebody else?" And I'll never forget his answer. He said, "Rick," he said, "there are two types of leaders. Some men are Eisenhowers and some men are Pattons. Mm-hmm. And I'm a Patton." Now, I don't know if many people today know Dwight Eisenhower as a general or George Patton as a general, but they were very different. Mm-hmm. I mean, George Patton was a very fiery guy, emotional, whatever. And George Steinbrenner aligned himself with General Patton. I remember, Donald, walking to my car in the parking lot that afternoon thinking, if I ever get this job, that's the way you got to play it. He's General Patton, and I'm a corporal. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I played it. Arthur was a great, buffer, but Arthur, Arthur had his own issues with Mr. Steinbrenner. I had to deal with mine, but that's what it was always. I answered the phone, "Yes, sir." Mm-hmm. I started every sentence with "sir." "Sir, if I might suggest." And then by the end, it was, "Sir, I can't let you do that." But I was always respectful. Yeah. But I must say, and I don't think anyone would argue this, I would not back down. And there were many times some small, some large to the point where they would have been national stories. And I don't mean anything salacious.
Yeah.
I mean from a baseball standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
He would say, "This is what we're going to do." And I'm like, however I might have started it, but it would end up, I can't let you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would put my job on the line. One time I said, well, if you're going to do that, you're probably going to have to find yourself a new media relations director.
Mm-hmm.
And his response was, and remember, he's in Tampa, I'm in New York. His response was, "Yeah, you're probably right." And he hung up. And I'm like, did I just quit? Or did I just get fired? So I went home and I told this story to my wife, and she said, "Well, you can't allow him to do what he's suggesting to do, which is trivial. It's not. I don't want people thinking it was, banning, somebody from the press box or something, but it just wasn't something that was going to fly."
Mm-hmm.
So she said, "Why don't you go back like on Seinfeld? Go back to work like George Costanza. Go back to work like it didn't happen." I said, "Well, that didn't really work for George Costanza." Well, so I went to work the next morning, and I waited for him to call me, and he did at 5:00, and it was like nothing happened. He was just talking about the next day about a press conference that we were going to have for a new pitcher we signed, Jose Contreras, and he wanted to make sure, Hal got to speak and whatever. And at the end, he says, "Okay, anything else?" I said, "Well, you and I had words yesterday." He goes, "Yeah, I thought about what you said. You're right. We're not going to do that. Whatever."
He probably respected the fact that you would stand your ground. Yeah, he respected you for that.
And there were times where, and he said this more than one time. I can still see him sit. I can still see pictures sitting across from me. He goes, "Okay, we'll do it your way, but you better be right." Better be right.
It puts a lot of pressure on your plate. Now, what would
you know what?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, what I was going to ask you is, what would you say is one of the most memorable moments working for the boss? And I know you have a lot. I know you have a lot.
I think the thing I'm going to tell you a story that I hope people at the Yankees don't get upset but I've told this before, but Joe Dimaggio died during spring training of 1999. Mm-hmm. And I got a call 7:30 in the morning from his person that handled PR for him in New York, who we just lost this year, Howard Rubenstein, who I called the Babe Ruth of PR. Mm-hmm. And Howard was helpful to me, too, in navigating Mr. Steinbrenner. So Howard called me at 7:30 and said, "We lost Mr. Dimaggio. The boss wants to see you the minute you get to, how quickly could you be at the..." I said, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. So like 8 a.m., I walk into the stadium. I go up to his office. He goes, "Sit down. Howard told her?" "Yeah." And he goes, "I want this done right. I want black armbands. You tell the equipment manager I want black armbands. I want a video, blah, blah, blah." And thank God we had been prepared, because we're in Tampa and they're doing the video up at Yankee Stadium, so we have to get it delivered somehow. But, we kind of knew this was coming, so we were somewhat prepared. But I remember as I passed through the lobby and looked outside, in the front of Legends, what was then Legends Field, they have these plaques with all the retired uniform numbers, and it's called Monument Park. Mm-hmm. And before I left his office, I said, "Mr. Steinbrenner, I see people leaving notes and flowers. They're kind of gathering at Mr. Dimaggio's plaque in Monument Park. I think we should have flowers there, like a big thing, because that's a great idea. That's a great dude." I said, "Okay, I'll get right on it." And with that, his secretary comes in and she said, "I don't mean to overhear, but you're going to put flowers at Monument Park. The woman that does the flowers for the suites is here. Do you want me to get her down here?" And he says, "Yes, absolutely. Get her down here right now." So this woman comes in and she goes, "Rick, tell her what you need." And I had it measured. I want it 28 inches high by this wide. It's got to be blue. It's got to look nice, blah, blah, blah. Very celebratory. I don't want it to look, respectful. I gave her the description. I said, "How long will that take?" She goes, "I can have it to you within an hour." I said, "Great. Okay." And Mr. Simon, "Great job. Okay, go get them," So about 15 minutes later, the lobby calls me and says, the woman is down here with your flowers. I'm like, wow, that was really fast. So I went down to the lobby, and she's standing at the desk, this woman, and she's got a little, almost like a cup of flowers, something you'd buy in a hotel gift shop. That would be get well, or, I'm like, oh, she said, no, before you say anything, the flowers you ordered will be here within the hour, but I just went and pulled some flowers from the suites, and I put this together. I thought we'd put this out there in the meantime. I said, I don't want anybody out there looking at this and thinking this is what the Yankees did, so let's just wait. And before I could finish my sentence, who walks through the lobby and sees me standing there with the woman and this little thing of flowers?
Oh, no.
Mr. Steinbrenner. And he just erupted. And the only words I remember him saying were, get back to your office. You're off the flower detail. And I'm walking back. The woman is like starting to cry, and I'm laughing that this is so outrageously fun. And I go back up to the office, right? So I get to the office, the phone rings, and it's the woman in the lobby, the flower woman. She says, oh, Mr. Cerrone, I'm so sorry, but please listen to me. I said, no, don't worry about it. No, I explained to him, and he understands. I told him it was my idea to have this little thing, and you told him that. I said, I said, don't worry about it. So the flowers came, they went out there, everything went off without a hitch. And during the game, my phone rings and it says GMS Suite. Oh boy. I pick it up and the person there says, Mr. Steinbrenner wants to see you right away. And I'm like, oh, what did I do now? So I walk over, and as I walk in the door, he's on the other side of the room talking to people. When he sees me, he doesn't even excuse himself. He just bolts for me. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? He puts out his hand and he says, I really treated you badly today. I'm really embarrassed, by the way, that I conducted myself with you. You've done an unbelievable job for me. And this was a wonderful day. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I'm like, okie doke.
All right. Now my blood pressure can go back down.
Oh, wow. It was funny. But anyway, he then called me in and he said, I want you and Debbie Timon, who was and still is, the vice president of marketing for the Yankees.
I think I've met her before.
We're going to have, and she's very helpful to us with the Taylor Hooton Foundation every year when we have our annual event there, really always going above and beyond. But he instructed us, he mandated us or trusted us to put together a Joe Dimaggio Day, because Joe Dimaggio had a plaque on the wall of Monument Park. But when you pass away a person of that magnitude, like 3 years earlier, Mickey Mantle had passed away, and he went from having a plaque to a monument. Mm-hmm. So we were going to unveil the Joe Dimaggio Monument, and he wanted Debbie and I to coordinate it. And it was so now it's in April, and it was really like, what do we do? I mean, like, we're going to unveil a monument. Okay, well, so we kind of scripted this program where we realized the only link to Dimaggio's playing career was our public address announcer, Bob Shepard, the late Bob Shepard, who his first year, the first opening day he introduced Joe Dimaggio in the Yankee lineup, and he was that link. So we decided to have him introduce the lineups just like he would have in the World Series of 1951, Yankees-Giants, the last lineup that Dimaggio was ever in. That's how we started. So the field is completely blank, and, welcome to Yankee Stadium. Here are the lineups for today's Game 6 of the 1951 World Series.
That's cool.
For the New York Giants. And the people started cheering like it was the regular. So that's how it started. And then we got Paul Simon to sing Mrs. Robinson with the famous line, "Where have you gone, Joe Dimaggio?"
Oh, that's cool.
And the one thing I remember is Paul Simon said, "I'll do it, but it really needs to be done in center field." And we're thinking, all by yourself in center field? I mean, the podium is at home plate. But I must tell you that I will never argue again with Mr. Simon, because he knew what he was. It was magnificent. It was beautiful. And we had a beautiful video, and we brought back teammates, and it was great. And Mr. Steinbrenner said to me after the game, "Hey, I saw him in the elevator, and he said that might be the best day I've ever spent in this stadium." That's a great compliment.
Yeah,
that meant a lot.
Yeah,
but
I bet.
But listen, I loved the man. He was tough to work for. He was demanding, but you know what? He never took his eye off the prize.
No.
He never took his eye off the prize. I remember like how happy he would be the night we would win if we had a post-game celebration or in the clubhouse. And the next day, like when the parade was, it was like it never happened. It was on to next year.
And
Yeah,
the experiences and everything you learned from him have really helped, I'm sure, over the years, just being the guy he is and the leader he was.
Well, listen, I had to be a certain way. I'll tell you another story if I can. I mean, I kind of got the reputation that I had is that he would listen to me. And one year, and this is in Bill Madden's wonderful biography of Mr. Steinbrenner. One year, I want to say it was 2003, before we went to spring training. The Yankees had always provided the staff down there, the coaches and the staff, with furnished apartments, a car, meal money. But he owned a hotel in Tampa, the Radisson Bay Harbor. And we all got these letters that for spring training, we would get a complimentary hotel room in the Radisson Bay Harbor for spring training and a meal allowance of $60 a day to be spent in the Radisson that had one restaurant. And I think it was a rib place. So now everybody on the staff, the trainers, the equipment managers, the traveling, they're all in my office with these letters. You got to do something. You can talk to him. He'll listen to you. I said, well, if I have the opportunity. So anyway, just so happens that day he calls and he said, now you got that letter about spring training, right? And you're good with that. I said, no, actually, I'm not good with it. He said, what? Well, why? And I said, to him, I can't believe I said this, but this is the honest to God's truth. I said, sir, you and I are both businessmen. Now, you are a lot more successful than I can ever hope to be, but we're businessmen, and you are sending me and all these other people on a business trip that is 9 weeks long or 8 weeks long.
Oh, yeah, a long time.
And you're telling us that we have to eat in the same restaurant every day. You're also not giving us any money to put gas in the car. And what if we have to get when we get our clothes cleaned? Like the laundry, the dry cleaning. You want us to look like Yankees. We want to look like Yankees. And he said to me, I really didn't think this through. Okay, let me think about this. I'll get back to you. So now all these guys, when they see me at lunch the next day, did you talk to him? I did. What did he say? Well, after I went through this whole thing about why I didn't think this was right, he said that he probably didn't think it through, and that and they're patting me on the back. Drinks
you're a hero.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you're a hero.
I'm a hero. The next day he calls me back and he says, I've thought about what you said. You made a lot of very good points. All right, we'll pay for your dry cleaning. And he hung up. So now these guys, did you talk to the boss? And I'm like, I did. And what did he say? I said, he's going to pay for the dry cleaning. And they're like, dry cleaning? Who cares about the dry cleaning?
That's all George took from it.
So, no, I just think he was, he was playing with me. But I think what happened was he went to his manager of his hotel and said, I need these 40 rooms or whatever it is at rack rate. Wait a minute, I can get $300 a day for these. You want me to give them to you for 60? This is crazy. We'll lose our shirts. And that, anyway, it ended up being, but, listen, Mr. Steinbrenner, he gave you the best of everything. And I have, it was an honor to work for the Yankees. It was an honor to work for George Steinbrenner and to know what he thought of me.
Yeah. Now,
good and bad.
Exactly. Now, working for the Yankees, working for Steinbrenner, I mean, obviously he wanted the best of everything. He put together some amazing teams, especially when you were there.
Right.
And you had the opportunity to see a bunch of World Series. You were part of them. You've got World
Right.
Series rings. How many championships did you guys win when you were with the Yankees?
Well, we won 4 American League championships in the 11 years that I was there, and 4 World Series.
So you have all 4 World Series rings today?
No, I don't. I was presented with along with the players and coaches and managers on the field, 4 World Championship rings and 2 American League championship rings for the 2 years that we did not win the World Series. One of the rings I apparently, back in the day, promised to my son when he graduates college. He remembered that. So
I bet he didn't forget it.
No, my son has one. But when I only had 2, I got the 96 ring, which I obviously wore very proudly. Mm-hmm. And then when I got the 98 ring, which is the second one, I gave that one to my father.
Okay. It's fascinating when you wear them because you're very generous. You let people wear the ring. I mean, complete strangers that could easily just take off with it. But it's what I like about it best is just the look on people's face that they get to put their favorite team's World Series ring on, and they're just so excited about it.
Well, there's 2 things that come to mind when you say that. And one is I'm so glad you get that because that's why I wear it. Other than it, I'm proud to wear it. But one of the biggest reasons is, number one, it's a great conversation starter.
Oh, it is.
And number 2, if you can give some people some joy, I just did it the other night at a restaurant, where the guy behind the bar was, telling me what a big Yankee fan he was. He can't wait for the season to start and this and that. And then when he saw this ring, he was like, to put it on and take pictures with his cell phone and everything. But I'll tell you another funny ring story that you don't remember, but you were a part of. At one of the fundraising events a couple of years ago that we had at Yankee Stadium, as you know, we always have Brian Cashman come up, and he does a very candid Q&A. I mean, if it was a press conference, man, some of it would make news because he doesn't hold back. He'll answer your question.
Yeah, and for those listening, Brian Cashman is the general manager of the New York Yankees. For those non-Yankee fans.
Right. So one time somebody said to him, he goes, "Where'd you get that ring on your finger?" And Brian, like I would, said, "This is a world this is the 2009 World Championship ring, and if you if you work hard, you're part of a team, you can get one." And he really kind of was, really. It was a very motivational little talk. Well, before the event, we all stuffed gift bags with these wonderful promotional items that Debbie Timon and her staff give us. And unbeknownst to anybody at this moment, one of those giveaway items, promotional items, was a unbelievable, beautiful replica of that ring. So the kid that asked the question, right, after Brian's, he got his gift bag, he's like, "Hey, remember what Mr. Cashman said about having to work hard? I don't have to. I just got my ring."
I do remember that. And the one thing I do know about the World Series ring is it will not get you out of a speeding ticket in Florida. The guy must have been a Red Sox fan.
Yeah, we learned that. I got caught speeding going to Fort Myers, and I want people to know I didn't say, "Look at my ring, get me out of the ticket." So don't make people think that. But
it was on your left hand. I was hoping the cop might have been a Yankee fan, and to see how it would work.
But I will say something, Donald. You're incorrect on it. Didn't get us out of the ticket that time.
It might have before, but not that particular day.
No, exactly. I remember telling one cop, a police officer, on the way home from the stadium at maybe 12:30 at night, a policeman pulled me over because he said I was kind of swerving, and he wanted to make sure. He goes, "Have you had a bad day?" And I remember saying, "I work for George Steinbrenner." And he said, "Okay, move along."
He understood. Now, out of all the World Series that you were part of, which one would you say is the most memorable?
Well, it's funny, but first of all, your first World Series, it's very hard to top that as being, and that was, you're down 2-0. And we haven't talked about Joe Torre, the manager, but, we're down 2-0. We were down 1-0. We had gotten beat up pretty badly in game 1. The series was delayed, as I remember, by weather, and we got beat up. We had waited a while because we ended the American League Championship Series against the Orioles in 5 games, so we had a bit of a gap, and then there was weather, so we did not play well, and the Braves beat us rather handily in game 1. And Joe Torre tells this story, and he's put it in his book, but he tells this story that people have said to me, that didn't happen. Come on. And I'm like, I was there. I was there. I was standing outside the door of Joe's office. I might have even been with Mr. Steinbrenner for some reason, like he was in conversation, and he poked his head. This is before game 2 of the World Series. Joe is the first-year manager of the Yankees, who's just gotten blown out in game 1. And Mr. Steinbrenner, Donald, I remember this like it was yesterday. He pokes his head. He goes, "Okay, Joe, go get him. We'll get him tonight." And Joe says something to the effect of, "Yeah, I don't know, boss. I don't know how I feel about tonight. We're still a little, you're not on our game yet. We might lose tonight, but don't worry. We're going to Atlanta. That's my town. We'll win 3 there, and we'll come back and win it for you here next Saturday." And George Steinbrenner turns around and looks at me like, is this man nuts? That's a true story. And that's exactly what happened. We lost that night. We went to Atlanta, 3 unbelievable games. We came back to this wonderful night. So that's memorable. Every one of them had something memorable in them. But remember, the next 2 were sweeps.
Yeah.
4-game sweep against the Padres, a 4-game sweep against the Braves. Then the next one is a Subway Series against the Mets. It's like I was getting a ring or I was out of a job, so to speak.
Exactly.
That's the way it was kind of laid out. But you have to look at 2001, a month after 9/11 and all the drama, George Bush throwing out the first pitch for game 3, the unbelievable comebacks in game 4 and 5, an incredible game 7 that we ended up losing in the bottom of the 9th. I mean, 9/11 had a tremendous impact on all of us. So I think that's probably, it's not a joyous memory, a joyful memory, but to look at, I always believed that the Yankees had I believe this with the Pirates, because I even wrote about it. I wrote a column in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette after I left the Pirates about if you work for the Pirates, and I'm talking about any team, you have a gift. You're given a gift because you can impact people's lives. Mm-hmm. You can change people's lives. And I always say, if you just try to make someone's day, you might just change their life. It happened to me. Do I have a minute to go back and tell you another story from college? So somehow I get an invitation to attend a college sports editor's seminar at Wrigley Field in the summer or in the spring of 1974. And I don't know how I got to go. I mean, the department got the invitation. I don't know how I was selected to go, along with another writer on the staff, Phil Cadner, who went on to have a wonderful career as a political writer in Chicago. But we ended up going, and Phil knew Chicago, and he's like, we need to leave it really early because the traffic and there's no parking at Wrigley Field. So I think we left at like 8 o'clock in the morning, 7, whatever. We found a parking space on the street somewhere, and we get to the ballpark. It's 9 a.m.
Okay.
So we walk over to the press gate, and there's a middle-aged man, an elderly man who's probably younger than I am now, standing at the press gate, and we present him with the letter. And he looks at the letter, and he says, "You see what time this thing starts?" And I said, "Yes, sir, 12 o'clock. He goes, "It's 9 o'clock in the morning." I said, yeah, and Phil says, we were worried about parking, so we're early. What should we do? And he could have said, and today he would say, come back at 10 to 12, but, and this is not happening today. He said, well, go on in, make yourself at home. So there's Phil Cadner and I, and we are in Wrigley Field, and we are the only people in Wrigley Field.
Okay.
And we wandered down to the railing by the first base dugout, which was the visitors' dugout, but for some reason, that's where we were. And after maybe an hour, hour and a half of standing there looking at this beautiful ballpark, this person in a Cubs uniform comes out of the left field corner, because that's where the Cubs locker room was in those days. Oh, there's a Cub, something there. And as he's getting closer, Phil nudges me and he goes, hey, that's Ernie Banks. Now, Ernie Banks, the legendary Cub, Mr. Cub, let's play two. He's walking and Phil yells over, hey, Ernie, and we wave. Now, what would you hope he does? Wave back. He waves back and he keeps walking right to us. And he gets right in front of us. What are you two doing here? And one of us said, we're here for the college sports writers seminar. He goes, oh, you two want to be sports writers. And Phil, thank God, Phil, thank you so much. He says, well, I do, but Rick here, he wants to be the PR director of a major league team. I don't think he said the Yankees. And Ernie, with that, shifted his focus, got right in front of me. And he said, so you want to be a big league PR director. And then he gave me this pep talk that if I kept believing it and working hard, that it would happen. Just believe that it will happen, it will happen. Now, say it back to me. I'm going to be a big league PR director. Yeah, I said it back to him. Say it again, louder. And I'm saying, I'm going to be a big league PR director. Okay. You remember to come and say hello when you get to the big leagues. Okay?
Yeah.
So the next time I see Ernie Banks is probably 15 years later, when Willie Stargell is being inducted into the Hall of Fame, and I went up there as one of the representatives of the Pirates. And my wife, Karen, and I are in this cocktail reception the night before, which is right in the plaque gallery. And we're looking, oh, there's Juan Marichal, and there's Robin Roberts, and oh, there's Ernie Banks. So I walk over to him. I said, excuse me, Mr. Banks, you will not remember me, but back in 1974, I told him the story. I said, you got in my face and you told me that if I believed this, it would happen. And I just wanted to thank you for taking the time that day to encourage me. And I want to give you my card. And he looked down at the card and he read it out loud. He's like, Richard J. Cerrone, Vice President, Public Relations, Pittsburgh Pirates. And he looks up and he's got tears streaming down his face.
Wow.
And he gives me this big hug. He goes, oh, and he walks away. Okay. 5 minutes later, he came back. He goes, hey, Rick, would you mind telling that story again for my wife? I'm like, but you know what? Did Ernie Banks have to do that? All he had to do was wave.
Exactly.
But that's the gift you're given. And people, I feel bad for the people that don't get that.
Yeah, and since we've been working together, you've had the opportunity to introduce me to countless big league players, Hall of Famers, coaches. I mean, just amazing people where, I'll never forget meeting Dave Winfield, a guy I grew up with.
Yeah.
And I remember walking through the parking lot there in Arizona with him. And you know me, I'm not a big, hey, take my picture with this guy. And I was like, but I really, really want to ask him, just because it's a hero to you growing up. And he was so touched. He was like, you really want a picture with me? And I was like, absolutely. Until this day, I'll never forget that picture. But what I wanted to ask you were, who were some of the players and managers in your time in baseball that you really enjoyed working with throughout your career there with the Yankees?
Well, I mean, I was with the Pirates for 6 years, the Yankees for 11. That's 17 years. I had two managers, Jim Leland with the Pirates and Joe Torre with the Yankees. Enough said. You can't do any better than that.
You can't.
They were very different people. Jim Leland's a former mail carrier. Mm-hmm. He's a blue collar guy. But my time with Joe was, and we were very close. And hundreds of dinners and lunches and different things we did together, not even talking about baseball. But and then when you get to the players, I mean, the one thing is the guys that I tended to, listen, it's wonderful to know all these superstar athletes, these wonderful baseball players on both the Pirates and the Yankees. But the guys that I bonded with really were not the bigger names. They were the guys that, could live next door to you.
Yeah.
And they're back, like Clay Bellinger on the Yankees, a utility player. He's now a firefighter, and different people like that. But, I loved, and some of them, there were some that were more challenging than others. But, you could say, boy, that player's being a real jerk or whatever. Or you have no idea what that player's going through in his life. You only know him in a locker room, in a clubhouse, right? You don't know what happened in his life with his family, with his wife, with his finances, whatever. We never think about those things. So I'm honored to have worked with all of them. And, that's just the way I look at it.
Yeah, and you did mention, having the opportunity to meet these guys and not knowing what's going on in their lives. And you can always tell. I mean, I try to explain to people because they'll meet a player for about 2 minutes or, oh, he really wasn't very nice, must not be a good guy. I'm like, one, they're preparing for a game, their job. They've got something to do that evening. So you can't judge them, on that 2 or 3 minutes that you meet them.
Right. And it's deeper than that because that guy, perhaps when he left for the ballpark, his wife said, I won't be here when you get back. Or, I'm just making that up. But
exactly.
Or his child is really sick, or he found out that his father has cancer, or we just don't know.
Exactly.
You just don't know. That's why, and for the most part, I did a good job with this. I always tried to gauge the right time, or gauge this is not the time to, some things, cut your losses, whatever. But, look, there's things you can't change anything, so you can only learn from them.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to, I wasn't the perfect PR guy. I had a lot of qualities, but, I wasn't perfect, and there's things I'd like to, if I had it to do over, maybe you do certain things differently. But this is the life that I have been given, and looking back on it, I think I did pretty damn well.
Yeah. And, and you've learned a lot. I mean, leaving the Yankees, you start your own business, Rick Cerrone Communications, which I want to talk about because ultimately that is what led our paths in life to cross. Rick Cerrone Communication handles all the PR for the Taylor Hooton Foundation. You've done great things for us. We've accomplished a lot. Were you familiar with the Taylor Hooton Foundation or my brother Taylor's story when you were still with the Yankees? Because Taylor passed away in 2003, and you would have still been the director of PR for the Yankees at the time. Were you familiar with all that was going on at the time?
I have to be honest with you, Donald. I might have been at the time, but my real recollection of my knowledge of Taylor and of the foundation was when your dad had a press conference with the Yankees, which I want to say was 2009 or so, when you, I believe, linked with Alex Rodriguez.
Yes.
Because I remember calling the number that I was given for the foundation and saying, hey, my name is Rick Cerrone. This is what I've done, blah, blah, blah. If there's anything I can do, blah, blah, blah. I don't think the message ever really got through because I'm sure I would have heard, knowing your dad and knowing you. But then I guess a couple of years later, it was probably 2013, the foundation was going to be making a major announcement about a study or a poll.
Yes, the
that
survey.
was done,
yeah,
survey.
Yep.
And I think that Don went to Jason Zillow at the Yankees, who obviously you were working with because Alex was the spokesperson for the foundation at the time. And you asked Jason, I think, we need to put on a press conference in Midtown Manhattan. We needed to, and Jason, and I thank him for that, said, the person you want is Rick Cerrone. So that was my first involvement with the Hooten Foundation when we put on that press conference in Midtown. And then Don asked me if I would consider being the event planner for that year's Give a Hoot benefit at Yankee Stadium, which probably was the third or fourth that you did. And I was happy to do that. And then I came on board after that in a PR capacity.
Okay. And since then we've built that Give a Hoot benefit up. It's a great event. We're so thankful for the Yankees and Jason and his team, and also Randy Levine, who's president of the Yankees, and he's also a Taylor Hooten Foundation board member. But I can't wait to get back to doing those events. Now, the work we do. I mean, I know you're a believer. You support everything that we do. During your time in Major League Baseball, you were there when performance-enhancing drugs were widely being used, during the quote-unquote steroid era. Did you realize at that time, that performance-enhancing drugs was a part of the game?
Well, I realized it. It was hard to turn your eye to it, away from it. But remember, at that time, there was really nothing baseball could do.
Yeah.
I didn't look at specific people that I was with. I don't want to use names unless you want me to, but yeah. Now, when we acquired Jason Giambi, very shortly afterwards, a story broke about his involvement. Mm-hmm. So I clearly knew there, and I had to work with Jason to get through that. Mm-hmm. And I remember, he wanted to have a press conference in New York, and I wanted to minimize the look of it for both Jason's sake and the Yankees' sake. So the way we set it up was we had a press availability, but when you have a press conference, you think of the backdrop and the podium and the mic and and every time he wiped his brow, people would take photos. I didn't want there to be that photo. So we had to come up with a way to have a press conference without having a press conference. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we announced the media conference, whatever. We had all the print writers in the auxiliary clubhouse, mm-hmm. no cameras. And he talked to them, and then for the last 5 or so minutes, we let the press photographers in. But he's basically sitting in a bare room on a stool. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't going to be that, that photo I'm talking about where the Yankee backdrop is like you would do when you sign a free agent. Yep. I didn't want that. I didn't want that back page photo. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I didn't want the TV to look like this huge press conference, like when we signed Matsui. Mm-hmm. It was a big press conference. So what we did was, with the help of my staff, we broke let's say there's 20 TV cameras and 15 radio microphones. We broke them up into like 5 groups of 6. Mm-hmm. 2 cameras or 3 cameras and 2 microphones. 3 cameras and 2 microphones. So he would go from station to station, and he would stand there, and it was almost like the TV guys were getting one-on-ones. Because let's say here's Warner Wolf from CBS, and there's Scott Clark from ABC. They're going to ask their questions, and they're going to use their questions on the air that night. Mm-hmm. So it was like Jason Giambi talking one-on-one to Warner Wolf. Jason Giambi talking one-on-one. It wasn't Jason Giambi sitting behind a table, wiping his brow, putting his head down, and it worked out very well. But obviously, there I know that we have, a PED issue there. There were other players that I never really thought of about PEDs that you later learn were. And then there's some you watch and you say, how can they not be? So, yeah. But for the longest time, and until the testing front, I'm very proud of baseball. They have the most stringent testing, and they keep getting people. I mean, like in the off season prior to 2021, Robinson Cano. That's a big name guy. So the work that we do with the Hooten Foundation is still very, very important because, as you know, we've got a player on every team that has stepped up to be on our advisory board, and they're basically telling the nation's young people, it's not okay to do this.
Yes.
I don't do it. I mean, and I know we've thought of it. Think about the names of the people that have stepped up for us, like Christian Yelich and Clayton Kershaw and Lucas Giolito and Chris Sale. And I'm going to be Elvis Andrus, and I'm going to be leaving out.
Lots.
I'm leaving out 30 guys. But these guys have stepped up to say, this is not how you should compete, and this is not how you should live your life. Because remember, it's not just performance-enhancing drugs. It's appearance and performance-enhancing drugs. Some people just want to look like that athlete.
You're absolutely right. And I'll never forget breaching that conversation. And because we were working with Alex when Alex was implicated the second time, and we had to sever the relationship with Alex because that's not really the message we want to send to young people. And we want to send the message to young people that, you can achieve whatever it is you want in life and get to the pinnacle of any business or sport without the use of drugs. And we had this idea of putting together this MLB advisory board of players, which would lead to our All Me League. And you were very instrumental in working with all the teams and still are to this day to ensure we've got a player representative that, by the way, we don't specifically request the player. These are players that voluntarily step forward to be on this board that really believe in our message and want to stand with us in our mission. And I'll put the link to the show notes, but as most people know, you can go to allmeleague.com and learn more about these role models.
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing that they're doing. It's a wonderful thing that baseball is doing in partnering with us and allowing us to use their trademarks and allowing us to use these images that we get through Getty Images and do. One of the things, as you know, that we do with each board member is we do a print public service ad for his team's game program or magazine or whatever platform the team wants to use it. So I just think it's a very worthwhile effort. And look, Donald, let's put it, you're saving lives. If you give seminars to young people and one kid out there decides, wow, that was really, I've seen the seminar. I remember, I don't even know if you use it when I remember going to one with Dad and here's G.I. Joe from 1982, and it's a little skinny guy in army khakis. Here's the current G.I. Joe, and it looks like the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah.
Or here's Miss whatever, 1978, and it's like the girl next door. And here's that same contest now, and it looks like, I don't even know how to say it.
Yeah, they're ballooned up.
Yeah. So look, it is an issue. And when you look at it from a baseball standpoint, if you just want to selfishly look at it from that standpoint, it really just wreaks havoc on the record books and on performance. I mean, you look at players that, are probably saying to themselves right now, if I had done PEDs and hit another 40 home runs or 30, and take the case of Fred McGriff, who's on our board, he only needed 7 more home runs to get to that magic 500 mark.
Exactly.
And what are we saying to those people? I've had former players say to me, if there's no penalty, and we talk about some of these players who are, and I have this, I hear this debate all the time. Oh, how is this guy not in the Hall of Fame? How could you not? Well, I've talked to some former players to say, you know what? I'd had a lot better career if I used PEDs, but I didn't.
You're right.
So it's an issue, but I commend baseball, and I certainly commend the Hooten Foundation for what they're trying to do to rid the game. baseball's trying to rid the game of PEDs, and with baseball's help, you're trying to help kids, not go down a very, very bad road.
Exactly. I mean, we couldn't do any of this work without the help of baseball and, obviously some of their, all 30 teams, but also the Professional Baseball Athletic Trainers Society, the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches, Getty Image, and beyond. But Rick, that really includes, Rick Cerrone Communications, which I want to talk about because you could have had the opportunity to probably get any open PR job in Major League Baseball, coming from the New York Yankees, working for the Steinbrenners, and your entire past history. So why did you want to start your own firm, Rick Cerrone Communications, versus trying to continue within Major League Baseball and staying in PR for an MLB team?
Well, first of all, it's not really true, Donald, that you could have had your choice of jobs. There's only 30 jobs, and they're taken. And people don't leave that often. More have left lately than I would like to see because of the pandemic and other reasons. But, you can't just say to yourself, oh, I could have had my, it doesn't work that way. And, but I'll give you the basic idea, because listen, if pick a team, Cubs, Dodgers, Giants, Rangers, they could have called, right? It was not a time of my life where I wanted to uproot my family. My son was in grade school at the time. The high school is literally across the street from where we live. I didn't want to interfere with that, but it also gave me an opportunity. I didn't start Rick Cerrone Communications immediately after leaving the Yankees. I went to work for a PR firm in New York City. I did that for 2 to 3 years, but I didn't like commuting to New York City on the train, and I didn't like that life. That's the life I didn't want to live, when I wanted to work in baseball. So with a little help from the PR firm that I was working for, keeping a couple of those accounts, working with them, I was able to transition into having my own company. And, it's a very small company. I have 4 or 5 clients at most, and then I teach. I've picked up an account where I do the editing for the Baseball Writers Program, and then I picked up, editor-in-chief of Baseball Digest.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about that is that it allows me to still work with the Houghton Foundation.
I'll never forget. I'll never forget that call. I believe sitting together at dinner. Yeah, and you're like, man, I think they're gonna offer me this position with Baseball Digest, which I thought was so cool because I knew you were really excited about it and you were still able to take care of your clients, which you do a great job with. But I mean, what services, briefly, what services does Rick Cerrone Communications handle for their clients?
Well, we're public relations, branding and marketing, crisis management. It runs the gamut. But I will be honest with you that other than the Taylor Houghton Foundation and the Play campaign, I've kind of had to taper that back a little bit to give me the time to be the editor-in-chief of a national magazine that this year is in its 80th year of publication. Wow. And when I took over as editor of the magazine, much like Carl Barger back at the Pirates, here's what your mandate is. Well, their mandate was reimagine the magazine because we're failing. We just don't have the audience we once did. What can we do? And what I found was that they were not engaged with Major League Baseball. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many people that I told, hey, I'm the editor-in-chief of Baseball Digest. I didn't even know you were still in business.
I remember when you asked Anthony Rendon that same question.
Yeah. And Anthony Rendon was not familiar with Baseball Digest.
And you were like, wow, this is we need to get these younger guys, back in tune with this baseball magazine that's been around for 80 years.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of fun doing it. It's been a great challenge. So, it's been one. Listen, it's part of the journey. It's part of the journey. I think it's funny, Donald. I will tell you though that if back in high school, if Coach Dowds had said to me when I answered that I'm going to be the public relations director of the New York Yankees, If he had said something cute like, well, what if that job's not available? What are you going to be doing? I'd say, oh, okay, I'm the editor of Baseball Digest.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
So,
Well, Rick, I want to start wrapping this up. And before I let you go, because this has been a wonderful conversation, and I think it gives people really inside track on, let's say, they're not the greatest athlete, but they want to be in professional sports and they want to help a professional team. This is definitely a route they can go. But I'd like to toss a couple of curveball questions your way. These are a lot of fun. And what I ask guests is just simply, when you hear the question, just fire from the hip, because obviously there is no wrong answer. So here we go.
Well, we'll find out about that.
All right. So who is the most interesting person you've ever met and had a chance to talk with?
Wow, the most interesting person.
Because I know you saved Billy Joel, but I know that would be an interesting one. But
Billy Crystal. Now I'm going to think later, like that. Oh, I forgot. Richard Nixon, or I forgot Jimmy. Bill Clinton. But talk to. I had conversation. I don't think there's so many more interesting people I know than Billy.
Okay, Billy Crystal, because I know, in our conversations you have met presidents, celebrities.
See, I would say
athletes.
Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr, but my conversation with them was literally 30 seconds, so that's not,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on to the second question. What do you wish someone taught you a long time ago?
How to make your passion be your gift, but not your curse.
I love that answer. That makes a lot of sense.
That's
too.
pretty good. And I'm not prepared either. So.
No, absolutely. That's the best part. Now, the last question I have for you is, this one is specifically for you, and I'm really excited to see what you have to say.
Oh, boy.
If you could live in any sitcom, which one would it be?
If I could live in any sitcom?
Exactly.
Which would it be?
Mm-hmm.
And you're waiting for the answer to this?
Yeah, I'm thinking it could be really creative. I'm just kind of anxious to see which one it would be.
You're going to be disappointed. You'd be really disappointed if I said the Munsters. I'm not going to say the end. I'd say, Happy Days.
Happy Days. Okay, I can see that.
Happy Days.
Yeah, I know you're a big fan of sitcoms and movies and that sort of thing. So I was kind of interested to see what you have to say. But Rick, I just can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to be on the All Me podcast. We're really excited to have you, and just wanted to thank you again for all you do for the Taylor Hooten Foundation to support us, to help us grow, which ultimately leads to impacting more lives.
Well, it's been an honor. It's been fun. I hope it continues for as long as we both can do it.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.